And I just wanted to clarify we weren't going to look at it as part of this webinar.
Hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Let's just wait another minute. I can see more folks coming into the room. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We have lots to talk about. So thank you all for joining us. We're delighted to have you be with us for this members-only event that's taking a closer look at WCR's new program, the Innovea Global Coffee Breeding Network. First off, I just want to thank each one of you for being with us and supporting us as a member company of WCR. We really couldn't do this work without you. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Alexa Heinecke. I'm our Senior Corporate Membership Manager. And with me, I have two wonderful colleagues, Dr. Tanya Humphrey, who's our Director of Research and Development, and Nick Muir, who's our Breeding Manager. And together, Tanya, Nick, and our team have done a tremendous job getting Innovea off the ground this past year. And I'm so pleased that they are here to tell us more about it today. So our plan for the next hour, Tanya and Nick are going to walk us through the background to Innovea. Why are we doing breeding? Some of the hows and whys in how Innovea is different to other breeding efforts, and the basics of how Innovea works. We'll wrap up with a current progress of the program to date since we launched it in November, and then we'll transition to some Q&A. So as we go through this presentation, if specific questions come to mind, please enter them in the Q&A tab, which should be over to the right of your screen, and we'll then publish all of the questions at the end of the presentation and answer as many of them as possible, as many as time allows. So with that, Tanya, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Alexa. And thanks everyone for joining us. I'm pleased to be here again in front of you to talk about Innovea this time, our flagship breeding program that we've just launched. So I'm going to start here. So this is a little bit of a cartoon that illustrates the situation as we see it. And so in the coffee industry, we, as is in the broader global coffee industry, we have been enjoying our time in the sun. It's been a great situation. The coffee industry has been thriving, and we have been living off the benefits of research and innovation that is being essentially taken care of for us, primarily in coffee producing countries where they're doing research, they're doing breeding to support productivity and the continued profitability of coffee production. And so we've been enjoying that all of that, and they've been quite capable in addressing the day-to-day issues, optimizing production practices, labor productivity, managing pest and disease, all of this kind of thing. But as we turn to the future, what we are facing is a much more dramatic situation, a tidal wave, if you will, that we are facing due to climate change. So with the pending impacts of climate change, we're facing a future with much more uncertainty, much more stress on the system. And this is on top of already the challenges of globalization and differences in trade and economics and all of those usual pressures that are underway. So we're facing a much more dire situation than we have in the past. And what we need to do to address that is come up with a much bigger, bolder solution. So we can't afford to keep doing things the way we've been doing. We need a big, bold solution to face these pending challenges. So a Noah's Ark, if you will, to address this rising tide and tidal wave that's coming at us from climate change. And so what we believe at WCR is that the varieties, plant varieties, improved coffee varieties are the solution to this challenge. So we say variety innovation is how we build our arc for the future. And so this is kind of illustrated really nicely in this photograph, which shows you the importance of the right variety in the right environment. So here we have two different coffee varieties side by side in the field that are under fairly heavy pressure from coffee leaf rust. And the variety on the left is a susceptible variety. You see it's highly defoliated. The trees are almost dead, very unproductive, compared to the variety on the right, which is a resistant variety, which is adapted for the right this environment, and it's vigorous and strong. It's a healthy tree. So this simple comparison shows you the positive impact of the right variety in the right place. And that's what our organization is really focused on. And so this is not just a plant biology or an agriculture issue, because with the right variety, you can address multiple issues at one time. And so you can simultaneously address production challenges, so pests and disease and yield, for example, which has a much greater impacts on the overall economics of the coffee production. So it's, if you have a disease tolerant variety, it means you have reduced agrochemical use. So there's environmental benefits from that. You have greater yields and increased profitability for the farmer. So with just that one trait introduced in a variety, you can have many follow-on benefits from that benefit the environment, the farmer, and the overall productivity of the coffee crop. So by addressing varieties, you can really address many of these challenges in one go. And so as we look at global coffee production, so this chart on the left illustrates the global productivity in coffee over the past few decades. And what you can see here is that the productivity in just 3 countries, Brazil, Colombia, and Vietnam, is really outpacing the rest. So these 3 countries who invested heavily in R&D and productivity improvements are really reaping the benefits of that. And the other countries here are struggling to keep up. And so if we in the coffee industry, if we want to preserve the diversity of origins and risk manage the supply situation, we really need to help these other countries improve their productivity and more closely improve their situation so that they are more competitive and can catch up to those top 3. And so this is where WCR focuses. We focus our efforts on these other focus countries, and with the goal of improving their situation to enable them to become more competitive. And so when we think about how to support productivity, research and innovation is a key way to do that. And it can take many forms. In coffee, we have a situation where such a hugely valuable crop has been vastly underinvested. And I mentioned at the beginning, a big part of this is we have relied on producing countries largely to invest in coffee R&D. And this disparity, the separation of, the coffee, the wealth in the coffee industry and the production and the investment in R&D means it hasn't really translated into R&D at the level that we need to sustain the industry. And so this slide shows you, by comparison, another, high value agricultural crop is strawberries, where if you look at variety development as a proxy for overall investment in R&D, you see in strawberries, there's something like 6,500 different strawberry varieties registered in the global variety database. And so this is a huge number for a crop with an overall global production value of around $15 billion. Compare this with coffee, and we only have around 100 coffee varieties registered. And this is a much larger industry worth 20 billion. That's just the crop production end, so the farm gate value. If you consider all of the downstream value in processing, retail, food service, and all of the related industry in coffee, so all of those economic multipliers essentially add up to more like a $200 billion industry, then this disparity is even more extreme. So this huge global industry has been reliant on such low levels of innovation, especially in the area of variety development, that this is not a sustainable situation. We really need to bring coffee innovation and variety development up to a level that makes it much more competitive, like has been done in nearly every successful other agricultural crop. So coffee's got a lot of catching up to do and a big gap to fill. So this is why at WCR, our research strategy is really firmly and finally focused on variety development, because this is the area where we see a huge potential for positive impact. And it's also the area which makes sense for us as a global organization to coordinate at scale on a global level. You know, there's certainly other things that you can do to improve coffee productivity, but variety development is where the big gap is and where it makes sense for a global organization to play. So our strategy is all about varieties, getting the right varieties into farmers' hands in producing countries. And we do this through these 4 program areas. And so I'm only going to talk about one of these today, breeding. But it's important to note here that all 4 of these areas are highly integrated and interconnected, because they are designed to deliver varieties on a kind of a continuum of short, medium, and long-term solutions, which is really what we need to be thinking about as we're facing a changing world. We've got current day-to-day challenges, but we also have massive future challenges. So we need to be fulfilling that pipeline along the whole spectrum of timelines. So today I'm going to talk about breeding, and specifically Innovea, which is our global coffee breeding network that we've just launched. You probably saw some material coming out on social media and newsletters and various things we've put out about this. So I'm going to walk you through what is Innovea, how does it work, and what is it going to deliver. So in short, it's this global network that we've created, and you can see the partners listed here on the right. We have 9 partners around the world in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And all of these partners have signed onto the network to undertake coffee breeding in a very collaborative and distributed effort. That is essentially, it's coordinated by us. So we're not doing it all. We're working together collaboratively with all of these partners, but we are playing a very central role to coordinate and bring all of this effort together. And so that's what we're going to talk through today. So what Innovea delivers, this global network, is essentially, we can boil it down to 3 things. So the first is the network itself. So what we've done in signing on all of these partners, we've created an entirely new and unique global platform to allow all of these countries and all of these coffee breeders to collaborate in coffee breeding. So this hasn't existed before. And the very existence of this platform, what we're seeing already, and we've barely started, we're already seeing the benefits of partners talking to each other, learning from each other, joining in this collaborative effort, and essentially working together to improve and enhance the capacity in the whole system. So this network itself is really the first big achievement that we've achieved already, is just building it and getting the partners to sign on. The second one is probably the thing that matters most to our partners. So this is the thing that is most attractive to them and perhaps entice them to become a part of this in the first place, is access to new genetic diversity. And so through this network, we have negotiated all of the complicated IP landscape around plant varieties and come up with a way that enables us to share all of this material with all of the partners. And so this gives a massive infusion of new genetic diversity for everyone to use to enhance what they're doing within their own countries. And that's certainly massively appealing to all of our partners. Then the third thing that we're doing, which is a little bit parallel to the core effort of Innovea, but it's quite connected. Because of the way Innovea is designed, we rely heavily on our partners to produce the final positive outcomes of this work. And so it benefits everyone to have our partners performing at their highest capacity possible. So simultaneous to our primary efforts in Innovea, we are investing in capacity building with our individual partners with the idea to introduce modern techniques, approaches, better management systems, whatever it takes to improve their capacity to enable them to do this breeding effort better on their own. So those are the three high-level goals, the things that Innovea delivers. And what I want to highlight also is that this is really a different way of doing things. So all of our partners are operating breeding programs to some level or another within their own countries. But by creating Innovea and bringing all of this together, we are doing this in a truly different and unique way. And so these are some of the highlights, some of the differences. We're bringing in modern breeding techniques into the system. We're bringing new diversity that hasn't been accessed before. We're doing this in a globally distributed way so we can test across multiple environments. And the structure of the network itself allows for both collaboration and competition, which is a key feature. And of course, there's the shared investment. So by pooling and coordinating our resources, we can do a much better job of this as we move into the future. So to break this down in a little bit more detail, so traditional breeding programs that happen kind of on a low level within countries, typically, there's some genetic diversity, there's crosses that are made, and plants are selected for what can be observed in the field. There's often measurements taken, yield measurements, disease scoring, these kind of things, but it's largely what can be observed, and then the plant is selected. In Innovea, we are bringing in this technique of genomic selection, which basically combines the traditional way of observing the plant performance in the field with modern computational genomics techniques that can really allow you to understand the genetic basis for what you're seeing in the field. And so by combining this phenotypic selection, the observable traits, with what we're seeing in the genetics, enables us to do the whole thing faster, better, cheaper. It allows us to more efficiently select the high-performing material. It allows us to select for multiple traits at the same time, and it cuts the cycle time potentially in half. So between different rounds of selection and crosses, you can reduce that time. So ultimately, this modern approach allows much higher throughput and much increases the chance of getting something out of the end that is really what you're looking for. So much greater efficiency by using these techniques. In traditional breeding programs, as I mentioned earlier, they operate within a country's borders. And if any of you have had experience with trying to move coffee varieties between countries, you probably are aware that there are a whole lot of barriers in place. It is very difficult to move coffee varieties legally, I might add, between countries. And so mostly breeding programs within a country's borders are working with the limited material they have available in their existing collections. And so these restrictions on the movement of material, it hasn't been since the 1960s that there has been really any significant movement. And so what that means is everyone is working with just a limited pool of material. And so that limits the amount of outputs they can produce and the kind of traits that are in their varieties. And so with Innovea, because we've negotiated through some of those barriers and we've brought together these global partners, what we have is varieties coming into the mix that have been sourced from countries all around the world. So from Latin America, from India, from Africa, all of these varieties are coming in and being crossed into the population to provide all of these new and unique genetic combinations. So this is a huge benefit to everyone involved. So when we think about the starting material that we've selected, you know, because we are focused on highly productive agricultural crops here, we want to focus on high-performing existing commercial varieties. So this is not a kind of exploratory research exercise where we're looking for, you know, new wild material. We want high-performing agricultural varieties here. And the traits that we've focused on are the things that most people want most. So regardless of which country you're in or what area of the world you're talking about, the things everyone's looking for in varieties, first and foremost, is yield. This is how farmers make their livelihoods. They need a high-yielding, highly productive variety. Disease resistance is the next thing. So coffee leaf rust is the big one that everyone is subject to. So we really need to address that. But there's also coffee berry disease, and within individual countries and regions, there are other diseases that can be addressed through breeding and trait development. So yield, disease resistance, and then cup quality is the third thing. So these are the fundamental traits that we're looking for, that everyone globally agrees these are the priorities. And so this is the lens through which we've selected the material that we're bringing into the breeding program. So we've started with high-performing commercial lines because ultimately that's what we need to get to, another high-performing commercial line, sourced from all different countries. And most of this has had the benefit of multiple years of evaluation in our own hands through our international multi-location variety trial. So we have had the benefit of testing out this material in locations all around the world and getting the actual performance data to compare side by side which varieties perform best under which conditions. So that results that have come out of the IMLVT trial have been absolutely fundamental for us in selecting this material and which are the best parental lines to use as we design the crosses and develop this population improvement program. The last point here is also a critical piece of it. So there is a lot of material out there that's interesting, but the reality is it's not necessarily available. And so one of the things we've had to do is negotiate the access and confirm that we are able to use this material to breed with. And furthermore, we are developing it and developing this population, and we are passing it out to our partners with zero strings attached. We are empowering them to use the material we give them however they see fit, to do further breeding, to propagate, and to release in their own country without any strings and restrictions, because we realize this is the way we can best enable the system to produce the varieties that they need. So another element that's really different in what we're doing is, you know, because we are working globally, we have access to a much broader range of environmental conditions to test this material. So when a breeding program exists within a country's borders, especially if it's a small country, there's limited environmental variation that they have access to for testing and evaluation of the material. So now, as we expand out globally, we have partners all around the world testing the same material. We have a whole range of environmental conditions that we can evaluate this material on in a very coordinated way, which means we can make much more intelligent decisions about which varieties we select for further crossing and development. And we can really be thinking about targeting population improvement and varieties that really meet the needs of the environments of the future. So if you're stuck within a country, you can't necessarily test and evaluate and select beyond the conditions you have available. But with climate change, we know that's going to cause dramatic shifts in the climatic and environmental conditions within a country. So really, countries need to be looking with a much bigger perspective to be understanding what are the conditions that we're going to be facing in the future. And maybe, you know, the results that we're seeing in Kenya is much more applicable to what they need to do in Peru, for example. So we need to be making these global connections and looking at the big picture to be able to make these selections in a very targeted way. Then the other part of the network that is really critical is the way in which we've structured and designed the breeding strategy and the partnerships. So it brings up this concept of coopetition, which is, you know, kind of a made up word, but it's made to combine the concepts of both collaboration and competition. So what we realized through our experience, especially in working with the IMLBT and some of our National Coffee Institute partners, is we've come to understand how deeply competitive individual countries are. So if they are breeding for their own country, they need to address the needs of their local farmers, their specific market, target market, and they're trying to outcompete their neighbors in neighboring countries. So they are inherently going to want to keep it closed, not necessarily collaborative and not open about what they're doing. And so these kind of structural barriers are real. They absolutely exist. And we're not trying to break down those barriers, because that's the kind of thing that allows countries to be competitive and to try to be incentivized to produce something better and more productive and higher quality and all those good things we're looking for. So we need to work within that system and allow them to be competitive, because it drives innovation. But we want the benefits of collaboration. And so Innovea has been designed to bring together these two concepts. So what we essentially have with Innovea is a pre-competitive collaborative network. So all of the partners in Innovea collaborate together to do the upstream early work to develop these improved populations. So we create this population of segregating diverse material, and we work together to do that. And then that material is handed out to all of the partners, which they can then take and do their own variety development. So they do that later stage variety development piece to produce the finished varieties that they need for their farmers, their target market, and addresses the needs in their particular country. So that's the part where they still get to maintain their competitive edge. And so this concept of coopetition is really baked into the way the network is designed, and this kind of separation of the two stages in the pathway. And so you can kind of see it here. This illustrates the timeline. It's kind of complicated, but it shows you the separation of these two components. So the top green bar there is population development. That's the direct activity of Innovea that WCR is coordinating. And you can see it's a cyclical process. It goes through cycle after cycle of selections, crosses, selections, distributing material to the partners every 6 years, and continual improvement using this genomic selection and other techniques to do that. So that's the part that WCR is focused on. But every time we hand that population out to our partners, we're essentially giving them new material to do variety development. And this is the part that's in their hands to do. And that's why there's multiple different timelines shown here, because this is where they can adapt to their own capacity, their own level, their own techniques that they're using. There's different strategies they can adopt, and different ways they could choose to release varieties. So this is where we start to get a bit of divergence in when is a variety going to come out. We always get asked the question, when will a new variety come out of this breeding program? And the answer is, could be any time from 2034 onwards, depending on the approach used by the partner and what they're seeing and how well the material is performing. So that whole second phase is the part that's in our partner's hands. And you can see also from this, breeding has a long timeline, so it's beyond the attention span of many people to comprehend this, but this is how it's done. This is how it's been done in every other crop. You know, a lot of other tree crops like apples or blueberries, for example, they started this decades ago, so they're reaping the benefits of that now. In coffee, we're a bit behind. We're getting started and ramping up, but it's going to be a long time. So we need to understand that. And of course, we're doing what we can to accelerate timelines and improve the throughput and efficiency as we go through the process. And so this separation of the two parts of the pipeline, WCR supports both of it. So the first part, the population improvement part, we support directly. We provide the genetic material, we provide the funding, the staff, and the coordination of all of the activities to allow that to happen in a globally collaborative way. And so that's what Innovea is. It's that population improvement pipeline. Then the variety development piece, that's the part that our partners are doing with the National Coffee Institutes, but we still support that. So this is particularly where we start thinking about the investments we make in capacity building. So we want to support them to do their own variety development. We want to invest in things that are going to make enhancements in efficiency and process that allow them to improve the way varieties are developed and introduced in their country. So capacity building is this extra initiative that we are doing in parallel. So it's really a critical part of Innovea, even though it's not a direct activity. The success of Innovea depends on the capacity of our partners. So it's really critical that we invest in this side by side. And so this year, as the first year of Innovea, is primarily focused on doing baseline assessments of our partners. So we're engaging kind of a third-party consultant group to come in. They're very experienced in making assessments and recommendations of breeding programs. So they're coming into each of our partners, meeting the breeders, touring their facilities, talking about their approaches to really understand what is the current baseline level of capacity. And then following on from that, we get some recommendations of where can we invest to make the most impactful improvements to improve capacity in each of those country partners. So it's a very customized approach. We're doing this baseline assessment in the coming year, but that will rapidly translate into specific projects for capacity building with our partners. And some things that it could include, for example, maybe increasing the number of PhDs that are being graduated through the system, so graduate student scholarships. There could be specialized training programs into new techniques and, statistical modeling or, genomics or whatever it is that they perhaps need some skill enhancement. There can be collaborator workshops, which we get hands-on and involve ourselves directly, where we get our own breeders to work side by side with their breeders and work with some of the real data with Innovea and learn from each other. As well as other things like support for process improvements, whether that's software or project management staff or whatever it is, equipment facility upgrades. Any of these kind of options are on the table. And one of the things we will be doing is seeking additional public sector funding to support this. And all of it will be informed by these initial assessments that we're doing. So I think that wraps up the sort of high-level overview of our goals. And I'm going to hand over to Nick, but I've just got a message from Maeve here. The first question, sorry, Maeve, I'm not seeing the first question. Do you want me to answer that now?
Tanya, we can continue. We'll save questions till the end.
All right, sure. Okay. All right, I'll hand over to you, Nick. You can take it away.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Nick Muir, breeding manager based in Costa Rica. So Innovea has just launched. We're very fortunate as part of our launch process, we're able to hold an in-person meeting in Rwanda with our partners from Africa and from Indonesia. And later in November of 2022, we're able to meet with the remaining partners in Costa Rica. So this has been a real strength for the network because it's all about that personal exchange of information, not just between Innovea and our partners, but between the different partners of Innovea. They get to know each other and get to know and learn about their own coffee breeding programs. So our timeline started in 2022 when crosses were made for the production of the first cycle population. That seed has been harvested, and we're in the process of distributing it to our partners. During 2023, the seed will be planted at all of the partner sites, including the breeding factory here in Costa Rica. So just to recap, we have 11 test sites across 10 countries, and we have 9 partners of Innovea around the world: Asia, Africa, Latin America. The field testing will go on for the first 6 years through 2028, and new crosses, the second cycle population, will be available from 2028. So there's our sites. There's a broad network, and it's a broad range of environments under which this unique material is being tested. So we can see the performance of a specific germplasm in Peru or India, and from that, we can find greater resilience for the future of this crop. So here's some progress by the numbers. For the initial first cycle breeding population, there were 16 parents. There were 30 cross combinations made, and over 13,000 flowers were control pollinated. These pollinations took place in 3 locations, primarily in El Salvador, but also in Costa Rica and in Rwanda. And due to the different environments of those countries, seed harvest commenced in December of 22 and will finalize in May of 23. We've started shipping to our partners in February 2023. Each partner will receive enough seed to plant in the field 300 trees. And a total of 5,000 trees will be planted across those 11 sites between 2023 and 2024. We have here some pictures to show you some of the process that's required to create this new diversity in the genetics of coffee. Coffea arabica is naturally a self-pollinating species, so if left to its own devices, it will self-pollinate, and that's how we have stable varieties of coffee. But in order to infuse new diversity into our breeding populations, we want a cross material that maybe has never been crossed before. In order to do that, we need to emasculate the flower, and we need to place the pollen of the desired male parent onto the stamens, as shown in the middle photo, and that bag is isolated so that external pollen is not able to pollinate the flower. You can see that those seedlings are then carefully prepared in nurseries and can be deployed out into the field. I don't want to tell you about the level of detail we have with the seedlings within Innovea. From the moment that seed is sown, it is assigned a unique identifying code number, and that will be carried through all of its life cycle. And it's a very important identifying value for the work that we're going to be doing with genomics and fingerprinting to allow us to know the identity of each individual plant. The cherry harvest is seen here. We're able to process those on a very small scale and have that seed clean and ready to ship around the world. Innovea is extremely careful to make sure that the seed is free of pests and diseases, and it goes through all of the checks required for export, both at the country of origin and in the receiving country. Here's some additional photos from some of the work we'll be doing recently. This is exciting because this is the genetic diversity packaged up as natural seeds in small plastic bags and being distributed to each of our partners around the world. Bottom right corner is Julio Alvarado in the black shirt, who is our farm manager in El Salvador, myself in the green shirt, and Dr. Jorge Berdning, the scientist who's managing the Innovea program. Take it back to you, Tanya.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So I thought I'd just end here, and I think it perhaps partially addresses the question there in the Q&A, because something, maybe it wasn't obvious, but the Innovea Global Breeding Network is Arabica. It's an Arabica population improvement program. And one of the things we know, we've heard loud and clear from our member companies, is Robusta is important too. We know this. And so we've just launched Innovea, focused on breeding Arabica, but we are concurrently starting to build a Robusta breeding program. And so in the coming year is really our first year of really digging into this challenge. Is what is Robusta breeding going to look like? And so in the coming year, already underway, what we have is a scoping study to help define what is the opportunity in Robusta breeding, meaning what is the market demands, the future projections, what do buyers look for, what do farmers need, all of these questions about Robusta production that we're exploring with a view to how do we breed new varieties to address some of these needs, and what is that going to look like? What are going to be our target traits? And so this is a much earlier stage in the process, but we need to do all of this planning before we're ready to launch a breeding program in Robusta. We need to know what's the demand signal, who are the people out there already doing Robusta breeding, how could we collaborate with them, how do we share germplasm? All of these big questions we're targeting to answer in the coming year, to the point where we hope to end the year with an actual Robusta breeding strategy. And so our general thinking is it's going to look somewhat similar to Innovea in that it's going to be a global collaboration with this shared effort, because that's how WCR operates through our partners. But there are some fundamental differences in Robusta and Arabica, which the person who asked the question touched on some of those things. It is a different species. It requires outcrossing compared to Arabica, which is self-compatible and produces, can self-pollinate to produce the seed. Robusta isn't. It's outcrossing, it's propagated vegetatively, it's handled in a different way. And so some of those fundamental differences in the crop biology will change our approach, and will mean that we probably have to adopt somewhat of a different strategy than what we're doing in Arabica. But the basic idea of having a global collaborative network, that's pretty much assured that that's where we're headed. And so all of those technical details of how actually we do that in Robusta is something that we'll be working through in the coming year, and you'll certainly be hearing a lot more about as we go forward. So I'll just end there and throw it back to Alexa to moderate some questions.
Excellent. Tanya, thank you so much. Nick, do you want to join us on camera as well? We really appreciate both of you. That was extremely interesting and informative. I invite all of you in our audience to post any questions in the chat, but I'll get us started with a few that have come in, as I've had conversations with our member companies over recent months. And one of the first questions is, what is the pathway for these new varieties to get from our national partners into farmer fields? Tanya, can I ask you to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so, I talked about how that we'll work through our partners, and particularly the variety development end of the pipeline is done at the National Coffee Institute. So these are government-funded coffee institutes in our partner countries. And so we work with them to do that piece, and it's essentially up to them to release the varieties in their countries. And so we very much play a supportive role in that. We are still, this is still some years away. So we're in the stage where we're having those discussions. We're trying out some different models. So, I talked about the pipeline approach. Breeding is long-term. The stuff comes out the pipeline a long way from here. But what we have in the short term is our trials program. So the IMLVT and the F1 hybrids, which you may have heard us talk about a bit recently, are providing very real near-term experience for us to navigate this variety introduction space. So it's always going to be through our partner institutes in the producing countries, but the way in which we do that is likely to differ depending on the capacity in the country. And so it may be the institute releasing directly. We may be working with the trade. So our green coffee suppliers are very well connected in countries and have the capacity to move some varieties out. So we're going to be exploring this issue and figuring that out, working through various partnerships to make that happen on a country by country basis. So that's kind of the overview of our approach, but it will be very tailored depending on what we need to achieve in which country.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, given your experience outside of coffee, can you recall any similar breeding projects that have been successful in other crops?
Yeah, so, I have a background in horticulture, so fruit and vegetable crops. And to me, coffee is a similar high value agricultural crops. Something like apples or blueberries or wine much more closely resemble coffee than, typical breeding examples like annual crops like maize and wheat and rice, where a lot of textbook breeding examples come from. Coffee is a woody perennial, just like an apple tree or a blueberry bush. And so some of the ways in which variety introductions have happened in those crops can certainly be held up as an example for coffee. And so things like vegetative propagation and plant breeders' rights and the types of relationships with companies, public and private sector, are all models that we should look at and think about how could we apply some of those things to coffee, given that we're trying to elevate coffee production to the level of sophistication of some of these other crops. So I think there's a lot to learn from other crops and in different parts of the agriculture sector. And certainly, when you're talking about breeding, what matters is to understand the genetics of the system. It doesn't matter so much which crop you're talking about, because plant genetics, there's a lot more in common across species than what you may think. So definitely drawing the parallels to some of those other crops is a really valuable thing we can do.
That's a nice segue to another question. Can you talk a little bit about the breeding team that you've built over the past year to support Innovea?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about the team because we've grown it significantly. I've only been with WCR just under a year myself, and one of my tasks, which is a great thing to do, is to navigate this growth period. And so part of what we've done is build up our science capacity. So we had when I started, Jorge Berni, who you may have met already. He's a very accomplished breeder and certainly was very involved in the design of Innovea in the first place. But as we moved towards operations, we know we needed more capacity. So that's where we brought Nick on. Nick has been, I think, maybe 6 months now, Nick?
Yes.
So Nick is more of a manager type, I would say. His job is to manage the breeding in the actual practical kind of back and forth way. These kind of global collaborations are very complex and they require constant communication. We need to be shipping seed. We need data sharing. We need quality control, all of that kind of function. And that's what Nick oversees. So that's a really critical role. So we've added Nick. We've also hired another scientist, another plant breeder, Santos Barrera, who has joined just in December, so still fairly new, but he's going to be contributing kind of more on the intellectual side of things and design and strategy for both Innovea and as we ramp up Robusta breeding. So we've added science capacity. And then we have another person who is starting in a month's time, which, I won't announce formally yet, but I'm very excited to be adding someone else to the team. So we have built up this really great, strong internal capacity to handle our breeding programs, as well as trials and all of the other things that we've got going. They are kind of the brains behind all of it and the technical advisors on all of these projects. So I'm really pleased that this team is growing. They're certainly great adding great strength to what we're doing, and more people to connect in a collaborative way with our partners. So that's, we're building internal capacity, but also greater connections to all of our partners that are critical to run these projects.
So Nick is focused a lot on partner relations, as you mentioned, and we have 9 partner countries currently involved in Innovea. Do you see an opportunity for other countries to join in the future? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, the more Innovea ramps up and we talk about it, of course, it generates more interest. And we extended the invite to a set of countries that we essentially have known and works with, institutes that we've worked with in the past, because this is a very complex collaboration. It was not well understood what we were trying to achieve. And so the countries that signed on first were partners that we were more familiar with working with. But of course, as we talk about it more, there's greater interest in this. And certainly as results start to come out, we do anticipate other countries will want to join. And we are absolutely open to doing that, because we see the value of collaboration and this global network approach. We are building a solid core that is growing in momentum. And as time goes on and positive results start to come out, we do anticipate that there will be others who want to join. And the time to do that is at the start of each cycle. So I showed you that sort of cyclical approach where every 6 years, new germplasm gets shared out to the partners. So right now, we don't really have an entry point to add new partners, because we have the crosses done. The seeds we have only a finite number of seeds, and they are committed to going out to the existing partners. So this first cycle, we have our partners locked in. But as we approach the end of that cycle, we are going to start to open it up to conversations to other partners to see who else wants to join, what could they bring to the table, and how could they be plugged into this network. So absolutely, we do envision it growing. Of course, we want to retain our original partners. There's no compulsion for them to stay in the network if they're not seeing value, but we do anticipate that they will see that value, and we'll keep the same partners and then add new ones, perhaps at each cycle. So in year 6.
I just had a comment here about the distribution of germplasm. I mean, one of the main concepts behind Innovea is there's been relatively little distribution of unique germplasm around the world to producing countries in the last 50 years. So as a breeding manager and working with our partners, I'm just so encouraged to see their enthusiasm and their excitement to receive this new germplasm, because if you're a plant breeder, what could be more exciting than receiving novel germplasm, getting to establish that in your environment and see how it performs in your country. So I think Innovea has really started off well, and we're really excited about these coming years.
That's a great note to end on, Nick. We don't have any more questions in the queue, so we're going to wrap up a little bit early and release everyone to their emails and the rest of their days or evenings. So on behalf of all of us at World Coffee Research, thank you all so much for joining us today, for learning a bit more about Innovea. And, we will keep the dialogue open. We look forward to sharing updates as things progress. And seeing you at various industry events this spring. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.